Welcome to Building Healthy Relationships, the 4 Habits podcast, helping you enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life. Here are your hosts, Dr. Andrea and Jon Taylor-Cummings, recognized authorities on the subjects of improving work relationships and cultures, as well as couple and home relationships.
Well, welcome to another episode. And today we're delighted to have another very exciting and interesting guest with us. We've got Gori Olusina Daniel with us here today. And we're going to be talking about some really interesting stuff, because today we're going to be looking at how you do business internationally, specifically cross-cultural relationship habits for success.
Yeah.
We're really excited about that.
Such an important conversation. And I know Gori has a wealth of information. So we're so delighted to have you join us on the podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. We like to give an official introduction. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest, and then you can see the context, and then we go from there.
Yeah, go for it.
So Gori is trained as a business economist, and over the last 20 plus years has developed a career as a highly skilled transaction advisor to governments, multilaterals, and private companies, having completed a range of research, policy, transaction advisory, and strategy assignments with organizations like Deloitte, DT Global, the World Bank, African Development Bank, the UK's Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, and Transport for London. He currently serves on the technical advisory panel of the UK-funded High Volume Transport Applied Research Programme as the technical lead on the Access to Climate Finance Research Project, which is seeking to build the capacity of low and middle income countries in Africa and Asia to access climate finance. Given his rich and varied experience, Gori is recognized as a thought leader on public-private partnerships and infrastructure finance, and has contributed towards raising $120 billion for the delivery of large-scale infrastructure and concession projects such as the London Oyster Smart Card and Crossrail, as well as a number of road, bus rapid transit, rail, renewable energy, real estate, and human and institutional capacity development projects across the UK, Asia, and Africa. You can see why it is such a pleasure and privilege to welcome Gori to this episode with us here today.
Wow, what a write-up. I mean, just think big. Billions across the world, huge infrastructure projects. So Gori, welcome.
Andrea Jon, thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
And we're just so excited about this conversation, because you will have so much to share with us about doing relationships well when you're working cross-culturally. I mean, in your bio, you're talking Asia and Africa. It's basically all the continents. I think we've heard just about everyone mentioned there. But let's just start with a little bit more context from you, Gori. What's your passion? What are the things you're involved in right now that you're really passionate about doing and delivering? What drives your focus at the moment?
That's going to take me back a little bit. You know, I think there's a saying that says you find your purpose in your passion. And if I drill down to something that's common across all the things that really gets me energized and excited, is the idea that I moved by unrealized potential.
Wow.
And, when I say I have to think back, I go back to when I first recognized this. This was probably back at university, when I just realized this is really what moved me, the idea of bridging the gap between what's possible and what at the moment seemed, impossible. And I sort of capture that in unrealized potential. And I ended up, even as I was working through this passion of mine, I ended up developing a phrase that I've just lived by for the last 30 years. Certainly the last 25 years, is that, I want to be focused on the development of people, companies, and nations. And I go back to that sort of sentence and that sort of thought, because it's, now looking back, I see that, I'm actually doing some of the things that I was really, really passionate about, and some of the things that I captured into that statement. For the last 15, 20 years, a lot of my work has been working with countries, particularly developing countries, helping them structure projects access finance. And it's something that 25 years ago, when I made that sort of statement, I never thought about in the slightest. So I remember building on this sort of thought, and when I added nations, that was just a completely distant possibility. I knew that working with people, working with companies could get me into management consultancy, which is where I started, helping companies think about what's possible, and then structuring plans to help them get from where they are to where their strategic planning goals led them.
Right, right. And now nations, it seems like just an addition at the end of the sentence, but wow. Has that become your playing ground? Is how do you do what you do on a large scale? I can see you're such a visionary. So how do you make what seems impossible possible on national scales, impacting countries and continents? From what I understand. Any more that you want to
No, I think
unpack at a high level on that?
I think I've dug myself a pit by talking about, some of my, what my wife calls grand views. I honestly really believe that anything is possible when you think outside of limited time scales and resources.
Mm.
Right? My view is the word impossible really means it hasn't been done before. We don't know how to do it. Right? And so I find, particularly in emerging markets, low and middle income countries, you can take some of the learnings from advanced countries and just transfer them if you are culturally sensitive. So a lot of the pitfalls in our industry is the idea of trying to do that without being culturally sensitive, which is what links into the conversation that we're having today. You can't just cut and paste. You've got to take from models that have worked, and then you've got to pay attention to the nuances of certain environments and see how some of that learning can be adapted and actually improved upon, which is some of the stuff that we're seeing in emerging markets, where even now innovations in emerging markets are coming the other way. Just this week we learned that BWD, the Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer, has just overtaken Tesla in sales in global sales of electric vehicle cars in Q4 2003. China, which just years ago was considered an emerging market, is now developing companies that are globally competitive.
That could take us on to a whole other conversation, and maybe it would be good to do a podcast version too, because I really believe that with technology, with artificial intelligence, with the global playing field that we have in terms of potential customers, emerging markets, and I think of my own little country, Jamaica, can leapfrog in their position of influence and impact and income if we could just find a way to harness it and use the natural resources. I mean, in Jamaica, I think everybody there is just so clever. We're known for doing things either really well or really badly. The international reputation. But that's a whole other conversation we'd love to have. How can we, I'm sure there's so many lessons to share, but what comes to mind picking up on that point of cultural sensitivity in a relationship context? When you are whether it's the innovations from the more developed countries going into these emerging markets or the other way around, what are some of the lessons that you've learned around cultural sensitivity and around doing relationships well on this cross-cultural platform?
I think perhaps the biggest is recognize that every day is a school day. Right? The whole concept of being intellectually curious, right? Holding no assumptions. There is this tendency to overgeneralize when it comes to relationships, when it comes to engaging, and that is essentially the recipe for disaster when you're engaging cross culturally, because while there are commonalities, every culture prides on respect, but respect in the English sense, the UK sense, which and we can't really run away from the fact that even in the UK there is significant cultural diversity, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is not just about country level. This is about recognizing that countries, companies are collections of peoples, right? And even in families, which I'm sure we'll come to when we're talking about relationships, even within my family unit, which is just 4 people, 3 plus myself, we are 4 different personalities. So
That's right.
so take that, blow that out of the sort of small family unit into a community, into a company, and into a country. You realize how important this idea of cross-cultural sensitivity is. And for me, the one abiding rule is you've really got to take people as they are, not
Yeah.
how you think they are. And the only way to know how they are is to engage mindfully.
Wow, you're so talking our language, and you know that. I mean, you're literally talking our language when you talk about the 4 habits, and you've already said curious and assume nothing.
Yeah.
But go on. Every day is a school day.
I love that. I made a note of that point. Every day is a school day, and that's absolutely the mindset to approach these things with.
Yeah.
No, that's
Well,
absolutely true. And for me, I think that really encapsulates it. You really have to engage in every situation, especially when you're dealing with people that you're not very familiar with. You've got to help yourself by not necessarily relying on everything that you thought before you engaged, right? While in the professional context, preparation is everything, right? And that preparation within the case of relationship management within the business context really should be about listening to understand rather than to respond, right? So you really have to be clear about who you are, what you're trying to achieve, but you really have to pay attention as to how what you're trying to say or do is being received by the people that you're working with.
Yeah.
And it amplifies as that engagement is beyond one person. Because what I'm saying is my key learning is if you're working, say for instance, if I'm working on a transaction for a particular country, the reality is that I'm not working for a country. I'm working for a department, a division, an agency within the company, within the country. However, the decisions that we take or they can take is impacted by a chain of other stakeholders, right? So one of the key capabilities that we have to develop is that idea of stakeholder engagement, stakeholder management, understanding where this individual, where this company, where this team sits within the ecosystem, right, of stakeholders that are critical to that decision. So we're talking citizens, we're talking senior government officials, and in some cases, particularly in emerging market economies where perhaps the institutional framework is not as developed, the idea of institutional alignment, and by that I mean everybody being on the same page, is a bit of a fallacy, right? So you then, in engaging in those sort of contexts, have to be so present so that you can really understand what is said, what is meant, and what are the implications of that before you respond and before you engage. So this idea of preconceived positions before you engage is a recipe for disaster and failed projects.
Wow.
That as a consultant, that must take so much confidence to go in with that humility. I mean, I'm using the 2 words that are probably used in opposite positions, but to have the confidence to go in to say, I know nothing and I'm here to learn, in order to give a meaningful response, a professional response, that must put it must take a lot of emotional intelligence from you to be able to put yourself in that position, read the room well, and then respond intelligently to what you're hearing. What are the skills that you found yourself pulling on or that you've had to develop to do relationships well in that context?
I think you've touched on a big one, and that is humility. And humility, I think, is a word that is understood differently. I want to shy away from using, the negative part of that, which is, some people understand humility as an admission of knowing nothing or not being capable, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Others understand humility as recognizing that everything you know is not all there is to know, right?
Absolutely.
Because especially in our industry, people engage us for what we know, right?
Absolutely.
But we need to respond by recognizing that everything we know is not all there is to know, right? And that, I found that to be disarming, particularly with clients, because a lot of times people actually hire clients to tell their board what they've been trying to tell them that the board didn't want to hear, right? But because it comes from, there's some sort of external validation from a so-called expert.
Experts, yeah.
The engagement, right? The engagement allows them to achieve their objectives a lot faster. And I normally come from a position of respect to my client. My sense is that my client knows enough to bring in outside help when she or he needs it, right? My client knows enough to be trusted with the resources and the power, right? And the leverage and leeway to be able to bring in external help. And I will do myself a disservice and my team a disservice to engage thinking that we are the white knights who have all the answers, because that's not true. And I find that is critical to building relationships, because no one wants to hire someone who they think will make them look bad. In fact, in my firm, in our firm, our position is that our job is to make our clients look good. That's what we do. And I always also engage with the sort of mindset with my teams is, as consultants, our job is to be invisible, right? We may bring in some smarts, we may bring in some frameworks, but what we're trying to do is build capacity, build the profiles of the people who have seen it fit to bring us along the line. And that is why, on some of the major projects that we have been involved in, you will never hear us mention, because it is the entity that is, it's the company, it's the agency that is driving the program that deserves a recognition, not the consultants that are just part of the process.
It's a fantastic approach, and absolutely, we would agree, the right mindset to adopt. What happens though, or do you have any examples where you might have gone out with that intention, but you actually haven't either been able to achieve this, and maybe this was in the early days when you were still honing some of these skills here, but haven't quite been able to achieve that, and there've been some tensions with the client, or things just haven't worked out well. Just wondering if there are any examples you have of that, or you've observed of that, and maybe other people doing things that haven't worked out well, and then what can be done to get things back on track, I guess would be where we're trying to get to from there, just to see if people start off and don't get it quite right. Are there any tips or tools that you might have to get things back on track, to get back to this approach of, approaching that mindset of everything we know is not all there is to know, and actually treating the client with the respect that you speak about?
I think that's a great question, John, because it allows me to step back and inject some realism, right, in what I've just said, right? So what I've just described is us on a good day, right?
There you go.
These are our intentions, right?
364 out of the 365, right?
Indeed.
These are our intentions. This is how we want to show up 10 out of 10 times.
Yeah.
But the reality is that, organizations aren't individuals, right? And sometimes I don't have to go further than our firm. I have come across, don't forget that I'm saying that when we engage on projects, we engage with multiple clients, right? So you might have a paying client, and that paying client may have multiple individuals who are part of that decision-making process. And all you need to do is get it wrong with one, because you're trying to get it right with the other, right? and this is where this sort of cross-cultural intelligence, stakeholder engagement matters. All you have to do is get it wrong with one and not be present enough to manage that exposure for everything to just fall down. Right?
Absolutely.
Part of the challenge that we have working with multiple stakeholders concurrently is being present and alive to these principles all the while. I think the point that I made is reinforced, right? When you get to a point where someone who is part of delivery or part of a decision making in terms of your engagement does not feel respected, does not feel included, does not feel recognized, that relationship is breaking down if it hasn't already broken down. And what you then have to do is be present enough to realize that, there's been some sort of dysfunction in how we're coming across, and then you've got to now think about how you bring that all back, because people need to be left. I one of my former bosses and mentors, he said something to me and to us that has always reinforced my mind. You always have to leave people feeling big.
That's powerful.
Whether you're doing, in that case, a corporate change program where, which is a euphemism for letting people off, or you are creating new opportunities, whatever you do, when people join your own organization, when people leave your organization, when people start with your project, when they leave, you always leave them feeling big. And I think that if we did that all the time, we would be in a much better position. And I think it's from those sort of reflections that I'm able to respond to your questions in that way, that it's important to make sure you feel people leave people feeling respected, included, and considered.
Do you know, that is, we love that. That is so powerful. And it really reflects how we've moved on in our approach to management and leadership, because there was a time where management and leadership was about being the expert, was about telling people what they need to do, was about turning up in all your brilliance to impress, especially if you were a consultant. The mindset was that was what you were paid for. But now, to do a really good job and to be really effective, it is about the relational side of things. It is about the respect and the inclusion and the empathy, which is why, we treat inclusion as if it's an additional thing to do alongside the day job, when inclusion is about how you do the day job. It's what you do all the time.
Yeah.
It's not a special skill, and relationships are such a key part of that. Any other lessons before we move on to how this big wide world of work impacts relationships at home? Any other lessons in the relationships cross-culturally that you wanted to share? I know you could probably write a book, but anything top of mind for the podcast?
I think we can spend perhaps a whole day talking about, cross-cultural relationships and lessons. But I guess, for the sake of your listeners and reflection, I'm trying to drill it down to these sort of universals. And I think for me, the third one that sticks to mind is, this is up there with, we talk traditionally, when we talk about intelligences, we talk traditionally about IQ, right? And we're now going into the sort of EQ space, emotional intelligence, right? Emotion. But I think that a third dimension is cultural intelligence, right? It is a competency that is required, because when we talk about cultural, cross-cultural relationships, a lot of times we think about ethnicity, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The way that I think about it is beyond ethnic boundaries. Is basically recognizing that culture is really about how we show up, right? And at the individual level, it's how you treat people as individuals. And one of the greatest learnings that I've had over the last 3 to 5 years is this point that I was just making. The fact that, when you're engaging, I think we're far, because we're now more of an everyone matters culture now. rather than a command control where, people are asked to conform. You have to consider everybody, right? And when you get to a point where you think that, okay, these are the only people that are important, it is the gatekeeper, right, that is going to get you into trouble because of the way you dealt with the way you didn't show them the sort of respect, inclusion, and consideration. It is someone that you consider to be inconsequential that is now going to trip you up. So I think the greatest learning is you really, really have to hone into the fact that everyone is important. You need to make sure that you are showing up with that consideration always, and not just when you feel like it.
And not just for show. It has to be who you become.
Genuine.
Yeah.
Because if it's not genuine, it's obvious.
They'll know.
Exactly, they'll know.
If people realize that you're just doing this, for some sort of ulterior motive, it won't land well, right? To use a phrase that I've heard you guys use, it just won't land well.
Yeah.
For it to land well, it has to be authentic, right? It has to be authentic, and it has to be something that, I think the fourth element is not something that you switch on. It's who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's who you become. So powerful, Gori. I mean, what you're saying, I love that line that everybody matters. The one-on-one, your ability to build quality one-on-one relationships, getting that skill right will open doors in palaces for you.
Yep.
Because you know how to treat everybody with respect. There's so much more we could unpack there, but I want to bring it to maybe a closer context, maybe the home context, and kick off with the question, working on such cross-cultural, multinational projects and programs, I'm sure will pull on your time and attention, pull on you physically, taking you away from home. How do you manage the dynamic with your relationships at home with your wife, with your kids, and making sure that life is in balance, given that there's so many pulls on your time in such high-profile projects and programs that you're involved in?
I think the short response is with difficulty.
No,
honest response, absolutely.
Can I raise that and say with intentionality? Because
that was going to be the end, with difficulty and intentionality. So I've been really blessed, right, with an array of mentors that have really, really helped me. My wife and I have been together for 22 years, married for 20.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I remember when we've had our first child, I had my first really significant senior management role, and I was struggling. And the CFO, whose name I won't mention at the time, who didn't manage me directly, but was one of my mentors. He gave me some advice, which I took with a pinch of salt, and I engaged. I challenge your listeners to do the same. His view was that I was struggling, and I was saying that to my mentors, and he was saying that what I need to remember is that my wife is biologically disposed to take more of the load, and thankfully I didn't take that message home with me, because I don't think my wife would have been fascinated by that, even though I've got to be honest, that is how I was disposed at the time, right? But my wife and I have been friends for much longer than we've been a couple, and I think that's helped us to build that sort of relationship where I see her as my friend, that I need to make sure she is fine. If she's not fine, I'm not fine, and that's led to some degree of adjustment. And then my next mentor, who was slightly more balanced in his approach, his view was, what you have to do is be intentional about the time that you spend, and how you meet the needs that are expressed in the demand for your time.
Love that. How you meet the needs that are expressed in the demand for your time.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm not finding I need any salt to go with that one.
That's a good one. But I like the wording.
Yep.
How you
Yes.
say it again. How you meet the needs that are expressed in the demand for your time. Yeah.
Right. Because the reality is, right, because of the nature of the work, we are away quite often. The intentionality for me is making sure that I touch base with my wife every day, right? No, every day, no matter what I'm doing, I respond to my girls whenever they ring, wherever I am, whatever I'm doing.
And we're talking about wherever you are in the world. You could be across the other side of the world. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because the reality is that they will know that I'm away. So if I get a call, it's important.
Yeah.
Until I hear it's about the remote control. And I say, look, I'm in a meeting.
So just so the audience understands, we're talking about your wife and your daughters.
My wife and my daughters.
Yeah.
Until I hear that it's about, something that could wait. And then I say, you know what, I'm in the middle of something now.
Yeah.
Let's speak about this later. Because I think it's important for my most important relationships, particularly my wife and my children, that they do not question whether I put whatever I'm doing before them. Right.
Yeah.
And that's the intentionality that Phil, let me say the name of the mentor who gave me advice that I'm using. Phil said, you've got to be intentional. You've got to put your most important relationships at a point where they realize that they are on a pedestal and that they allow you to be you and to do what you do. Right. And I think that's really, really helped me. This has translated in perhaps paying for domestic support and things that perhaps I would have had to do myself just to lift the load on the family. It's also played out in the discipline and how I've engaged to make sure that my girls, play a role from a very young age. I think, I think this is something that I grew up with. This is part of. I remind my children that, we have a heritage, an African heritage that includes making sure that you show up and you contribute wherever you are. And that's part of our discipline. And what that has done, is made up for perhaps some of the slack that I would have had to do, because now, it's not just on my missus. It's shared as part of everyone's responsibilities to do something in the home. And I think that speaks to the intentionality point, Andrea, that you mentioned.
Yeah. It's so important for us to be having this conversation and for people to be hearing from somebody as accomplished as you, and dare I say from a man as well, how important it is to be intentional about the relationships, to be clear who your priority relationships are with, and that they enable you to be the powerhouse that you are in the corporate world, and make the time to feed those relationships, because we're coming out of a mindset. We're still grappling, I think, in the corporate world with this mindset that anything that's personal and private should remain outside the office door. But hearing you talk about it is giving people permission to pay attention to the things that are important to them in their lives that allow them to show up well in work. What else have you learned in that space that you think what are the I suppose, what's the relationship advice? What other relationship advice have you had that you would want to pass on, especially to young professionals?
To your girls, even.
Yeah.
People out there.
I really want to pick up on the point that you have that you've just made about being comfortable in your own skin about the relationships that are priority.
Yeah.
And I don't take any credit for my orientation. This is why I had to start with the idea of being blessed by mentors ahead of me who actually made me realize that this was important, right? And you find that, skilled professionals are, are selective about the environments that they work in these days,
Mhm.
which means that employers have to recognize that if you want to get the right people,
Mhm.
you've got to take them as a whole.
Yeah.
You've got to recognize that, if they have a bad day at home, if they have a child that is failing sixth form, right, or 11 plus, because they don't have the parental support that they need,
Mhm.
they can't turn up at work 100%, right?
Yeah.
Because they have the home issues, and this is why I think that the world of work is changing, and any sort of employer that hasn't changed with the time is just going to miss out on some of the best and most talented people.
Absolutely.
But the flip side of that is what you said, is basically people turning up and recognizing that, look, what's important to me should be important to my employer,
Mhm.
because it's really the way that I look at it, and I've developed it, is that I think my family relationships actually feed my soul and energize me for the work that I do.
Absolutely.
Knowing that, I have showed up, I have contributed to, what makes them, turn up at their best, right? Which I think is my role as a husband, as a father, to work with my wife, to work with my daughters, to make sure that they turn up in whatever they're doing at their best.
Yeah.
Knowing that I've done that allows me to take 2 weeks off to do something. The other thing that, that I've developed, right, is this idea of never being away for too long.
Mhm.
And before COVID, my too long was 10 days. But sometimes I go because I think it's important to maintain that connection.
Mhm.
But there are times, right, where I know, and it may well be true for us someday, where couples have to live apart for an extended amount of time. I
Mhm.
think the same way that you use intentionality, finding a way of making that work for them, where that connection is burnished, reinforced, is critical, because the quality of your personal relationships has a real way of helping you manage stress, increase your productivity on tasks because you're focused, and also take pride in what you're doing, because both your work life and your personal life are now reinforcing rather than competing.
Yeah.
Oh, that is just gold. Just hearing you say, we could have you on a stage just talking about why paying attention to relationships and doing relationships well, especially the most important relationships to you, are so vital for well-being, for resilience, for performance, for career progression, just that support. Oh, you're getting me excited all over again, and I know we need to be wrapping that up. But I guess my excitement is that this is a message that people have been saying in the quiet, like in a one-on-one mentoring session, and not realizing that the mindset, if you don't adopt this mindset of treating the person as a whole, you won't have the right policies in place around, flexibility or hybrid working, or all the things that people need to help create a more sustainable work-life balance, so they can turn up and play full on. If you don't have the right mindset around that, you won't have the right policies, and therefore you won't attract the right people. That is a conversation that corporates need to be having. But we find that there is still some resistance to the idea of relationships and the skills, the human skills that you need as a manager, that you really, that's what you really need to manage teams well and allow people the space to turn up well and look after the people and things that are important to them. There's still a lot of pushback there. So everything that you're saying is so vital. That's what we need to be talking about in the corporate world now.
And things to aim for, doing, as you say, aim for 10 out of 10, 365 days a year. We're not always going to get it right. There will times we'll drop the ball, things we'll miss. We've got to be real about it. But at least we know what we're supposed to be aiming for, what the gold standard is, where we should be.
And that it's
pushing.
about who you're becoming as a person, what you are developing. We're just saying back to you everything that you've said, because, you've shared the insights
making some notes as we go. There's some really powerful insights there. But I do like that one about meeting, how did you say it? Meeting the needs that are expressed in the demands for your time, being intentional about doing that. Because there are going to be any number of demands on our time. How do you be intentional about meeting those needs and recognizing all these people are pulling on me? Which are the ones that I really need to get back to, focus on, invest in those relationships?
And
Really
what
powerful
do
stuff.
and for the people who are really important to you, what do they need from you so they can thrive and become that support for you to thrive? I love that. That is just gold.
Every day's a school day.
I know there's so much that we've covered, Gori, and so much that I'm tempted to ask, but I'm conscious of the time. Any final thoughts? Anything that's kind of come to mind that you want to share as a parting word?
Maybe the golden rule, which we all know, but it's worth reminding ourselves. And I certainly have been reminded with some very challenging relationship issues that I've had to deal with. The golden rule is to treat people as you want to be treated. And, oftentimes, particularly in the work environment, that is challenged, right? When you are barraged, where you may well be ridiculed, where you may well be undermined. The golden rule doesn't change in those circumstances. And I think we've got to really borrow a leaf from Mandela, right? Which says, how did he put it? You've got to shine a light on darkness. I'm paraphrasing now.
Yes, from that poem.
You've got to shine a light on darkness, not meet darkness with darkness, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that I think it was Mahatma Gandhi who said, "An eye for an eye leaves everyone blind," right?
Yep.
So that's why what you do is, rather than responding darkness to darkness, is you respond. You shed light on darkness.
Yeah.
You reflect the sort of behaviors that you would have appreciated in how you respond to uncomfortable and dysfunctional situations in business and in life.
Which takes a very grown-up, confident, and humble heart to be able to do that. And I love, we're going to end with what you just said there, because we like to talk about the core behaviors that we need as managers and leaders in order to turn up well, to have better conversations, and to achieve better outcomes. And importantly, to model it well, to model what good looks like so that those coming behind can follow.
Yeah. Well, another word I'm taking away from that is leave everybody feeling big, as you said. Feeling big, feeling well, feeling good. Not feeling low, not feeling down, not feeling bad, feeling in a good place.
And I want to add one more, because it's something you said earlier. To know how to leave people feeling good, you have to understand their cultural context of what respect looks like. So I love it when we talk about treat people the way we want to be treated. But if you go in treating them exactly the way we want to be treated, you can get it wrong. Yeah. So you have to understand the cultural context of what respect looks like, what honor looks like. When we lived in Japan, we had to learn that saying no directly to somebody's face is considered rude. Here, it's what you expect. There, it's rude. So treating people with respect isn't exactly how you want to be treated. No. Doing the things, showing respect is different, is what I'm saying, in different cultures. So yes, we all want to be treated with respect.
Well, the language is treat people equally well.
Yeah.
How you do it might be different depending on different cultures and so on. But it's the feeling of big, good, well that you want to leave people with.
Yeah.
That's the gold standard I think you were talking about.
I like your line, treat people feeling big. And it's our job to figure out what that looks like.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there you go. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you, Gori. We've learned some stuff here, some really powerful insights for our audience here.
Oh yeah, we have some of your quotes now that we'll be using.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Some really good stuff.
Thank you for having me, Andrea. Thank you for having me, John. It's really been a real pleasure spending time with you. And I must say, as you know, I'm a big fan of the work that you're doing. I think that this idea of relationship mastery, relationship intelligence, is really something that every professional needs to engage with, so that they can show up well, not just at work, but fundamentally well at home.
That's about who they're becoming. Thank you. Bless you. Yes,
Really
exactly
appreciate
right.
that.
Is there, if anybody wanted to get in touch with you, Gori, is there contact details that we can probably have in the show notes? Maybe think about if somebody wanted to contact you for the amazing work you do.
Sure, just look me up on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Gori Olusina Daniel. I'm there and would be happy to engage.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
I think everybody's going to want you to mentor them after that wonderful insight you gave us about balance in life.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and
Thank you.
maybe we have you back for another time.
I'm
Come and
thinking
share some more
round
of these
two.
wonderful thoughts. So round 2 at some
I'd,
stage.
I'd love to. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Alrighty,
All right.
bye-bye. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, and you want to hear more, the best thing to do is subscribe. Then you'll never miss an episode. There's a new one every Friday. You can stay connected with us on social media at The 4 Habits for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and to participate in discussions related to the show. We always love to hear from you. And of course, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on your preferred platform to allow us to reach more listeners and help people around the globe radically transform the way they do relationships so they too can enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life.